Well, hello everyone. Welcome to our first workshop spotlight, where I'll be showcasing a couple of excellent workshop mods, briefly showing how they operate, giving some personal opinions regarding their design, and even getting some actual insight from their mods creators. In this first spotlight, we'll go over a couple of mods from the game Hollow Knight. We have two mods of the knight themselves. We also have a mod of Hornet, a couple of stage mods, including a boss fight. So let's get started. First, we have the Knight, created by ZP Mods team. This was one of the older, high-quality characters created for the Rivals Workshop, being a real showcase of what we could expect to see from Workshop creators going forward. The Knight is a very fun and well-made character, especially for their time, but to this day, it still remains one of the most popular characters in all of Workshop, featuring an enormous amount of subscribers, and for good reason. The Knight acts very similarly to how they do in Hollow Knight, jumping around the place and attacking with a variety of slashes and spells. Many of these are taken directly from how they work and look in Hollow Knight. They can even bounce on their enemies with their pogo down air. The Knight's main gimmick is their soul meter. By hitting enemies, they get a small amount of soul, which can be seen on their HUD. If they have enough souls, they can then enhance their special moves into their powerful shaded variations, like turning their mobile dash into a multi-hitting burst option with great KO potential. So there's one thing this character has which is a pitfall we start to avoid throughout the years. Like I said, this mod is a bit older, so we weren't really aware of some good practices. Like we can see here their dash attack. If they use too close to an opponent, it just whips, right? Here, it just whips the move. And why is that? So what we tend to do nowadays is create a detection hitbox in front of the character, which travels with the character, and if that detection hitbox connects with an opponent, like so, right, then it immediately transitions to the active portion of the attack, preventing you from whiffing the attack, like so. Then, a couple of years later, in 2024, we saw a new take on the Knight, this time being made by the workshop creator Raygun. This new version of the Knight came with some new attacks, references, and mechanics, all while still being a faithful recreation and adaptation of how the Knight works and feels in a Hollow Knight. However, with some creative liberties and additional polish taken to make them better fit into a fighting game environment. Their new mechanic is based on the so-called Shade Charge mechanic. On its own, the Knight can use enhanced versions of many of their specials and even their upstrong, but doing so consumes their Shade Charge, meaning they cannot use enhanced attack until they get their Shade Charge back, which returns on a cooldown. So like I said, this Knight has some original moves like dash attack, the force strong, and even some slashes like up tilt and forward air, right? I don't think this is a bad thing, far from it. Since this is a fighting game, it's important that each and every move can be identified at a glance, right? Immediately, to have to know what they are. So it's important that each one of them stands out on its own, avoiding two or more attacks being too similar, right? So in that case, I not only approve of this, but I very much enjoy this original attack. For example, the neutral air is a favorite of mine. Next, we have Hornet herself. This mod was created by Ruber Kuber in 2023, so she was made before Hollow Knight Silksong had released, meaning most of her references actually come from her boss fights from Hollow Knight. Just like in her boss fight, Hornet is also a very agile character, affording some fun movement options and tools, like a grappling hook with her up special, which she can grapple into different objects, as well as her forward special dash, her dash attack and down air dive kick, where both can actually bounce on enemies. Hornet has two main mechanics. First is her Silk status. Certain attacks like her forward special applies a unique Silk status on her opponents. If she then connects certain moves on Silked opponents, like her down special, they will wrap it in Silk, allowing for potential follow-ups and punishes. Her other mechanic is her Spike Barb, which she can throw with her neutral special. This Spike Barb remains stationary. Hornet can then interact with it with some of her moves, like her up special and down air, but most importantly, is to knock enemies into the Spike Barb, and they have a silk status. They will also be wrapped in silk. So something I really like about this Hornet, which is also present on her boss fight, and I assume Silk Song as well, is since her needle is longer than the knight's, right? A lot of her attacks, she simply moves her body and lets the needle itself to the top. Right? So stuff like the down tilt and forward air, for example. She doesn't need to pull the needle out, she just moves her body and stings with it, like a needle, right? I personally think this is a very, very cool detail. Our first stage is the City of Tears stage. Funny enough, this stage actually predates the Rivals Workshop, first being created by Necodemon and made available as a skin for Basecast Frozen Fortress stage. This stage was then backported into Workshop by Horst Donut. This is a very simple stage recreating the fountain area from the City of Tears area. Sadly, this being an older stage, it means it's pretty basic, with a simpler background and the lack of the area's iconic rain. The next stages were all made by 8 Talks to Self, the first ones being LEGO versions of Forgotten Crossroads and Green Path, both early game areas from Hollow Knight. The Forgotten Crossroads stage is quite big and even features a different visual on the Aether version, based on the area's infected design from the second half of the game. The LEGO Green Path also has a fun layout and Aether gimmick, this time being the Acid River, which is present in this area. Here in Workshop, working as a stage hazard with damaged opponents. And finally, as a collaboration with Reagan, A Talks to Self remade his original Green Path stage by making a non-LEGO version, which served as the home stage for this night mod. This stage kept the same Aether mechanic with the Acid River, but it brought so many new details as well, like those flying enemies in the background and even appearances from the Knight and Hornet, if they're not present on the match, that is. Actually, we do have another stage, a very special one. This is the Mantis Lord boss fight from Hollow Knight, recreated in Rivals Workshop by Ruber Kuber yet again. This stage recreates that original boss fight beautifully, from the visuals to the boss behavior and even the music. The fight starts with only one of the Mantis Lords at first. After you defeat them, however, it's time to face the other 2 Lords at the same time. That's when the fight really starts. If you want a greater challenge, however, try the stage's Aether version, which instead recreates the Sisters of Battle fight, which, instead of having only 2 of the Lords on the second phase, it instead features all 3 of the Sisters, all at the same time. Now, before I wrap this up, I actually contacted the many workshop creators who gave life to these incredible mods, so they can answer a couple of questions about their creation. First, I contacted a couple of members from the ZP Mods team, being Orsa and Fabio, to ask some questions about the original Knight released on the workshop. The Knight was one of the first high-quality characters released for the Rivals Workshop. Could you go in detail on how that came to be? As well as, why the Knight specifically?
The reason we chose the Knight is because we were both huge fans of Hollow Knight, especially at the time, so it felt like a given. We started designing a moveset for it as soon as the workshop feature was announced, and in a few days I already had a sprite made. We both have a background in game development, which really helped. We also got a ton of help from the Rivals community, did a lot of play testing, and took a lot of feedback.
I know you guys were planning on adding equipable charms at some point. Was there any particular reason you decided not to?
It ended up being too hard to balance and fit into the existing kit, as well as being too much workload. So even though the system itself was fully functional, we decided to scrap it to focus better on the rest of the character.
Was there any other mechanic, reference, or detail you guys would wanted to add to the Knight, but simply wasn't achievable?
At some point we had a prototype version where the Knight could dream nail the opponent, with a text displaying depending on the character. We ultimately didn't go with it because we wanted to keep the bench as the taunt, and didn't know where else to put the dream nail.
One thing in particular I was wondering, did you guys consider giving the Knight a NES-style double jump, similar to how it works in Hollow Knight?
Nope, that never really came to mind. But at some point, the up special did act like that. I guess because the Monarch wings were way more present in the up special than in the double jump. That ended up getting removed for technical reasons.
Is there any particular insight or detail to the Knight's design you would like to highlight?
So we actually have a whole document going into the Knight's design if you're interested.
Next, I interviewed Rhaegar about his take on the Knight mod he released for the workshop. We had a previous The Knight mod on workshop. Did you check that as a reference or jumping point when designing your own version?
Hey there, Wizard. It's an honor to be here, able to answer a few questions you have about the mod I made. First off, I'd say that the Knight mod made by ZP Mods, the dev team, is a very beloved character, whose legacy is absolutely uncontested. I remember that reading the Twitter thread on the design practices they followed for it was what inspired me to start a dev team back then. I honestly try to be superficial with checking out other takes on popular characters, because I try to keep to my original vision. Although if the Knight, due to the age and knowledge of the previous Knight, a direct attempt was made to make sure I didn't fall into the same infamous pitfalls that mod had. Mainly, Hollow Knight uses the same animations for aerial and grounded attacks for the playable character. Something normal for a single-player Metroidvania, but that when translated into a multiplayer fighting game brings with it a levy of readability and visual identity issues. ZP Knight had this issue between the grounded and aerial moves, and additionally, a lot of ground inputs had very similar startup animations, which can be a big issue when you're the opponent trying to read the Knight's next move. On another note, I'm also a huge Hornet fan, and was also super personally interested in having a Knight around that was the correct relative's height to her, since PJ Knight is a big lad.
Was there any other mechanic, reference, or detail you want to add to the Knight, but it didn't quite make it through?
Oh, that's a great question. I absolutely love talking about stuff that ended up in the cutting room floor. There's a certain aspect that I'll wait to go into depth further, but a few of the original ideas for normals didn't pan out. Currently, the two references to the in-game charms you can equip are Back Aerial, Thorns of Agony, and Parry, the Balder Shell. But at one point, I was interested in referencing Grubberfly's Elegy and Glowing Womb, but both ended up too, let's say, tacky. Grubberflies was going to be a projectile F tilt, like Link's Smash Sword projectile, and Womb was going to spawn a little Knight minion, who basically just existed to shoot itself upwards for up tilt, and then nothing else. I decided these were too outside the regular expected motif of nail slashes, not to mention the range might have been an issue.
One thing in particular I was wondering, did you consider giving the Knight a NES-style double jump, similar to how it works in Hollow Knight?
Honestly, I believe a character that I make should only really have an Earthbound Kid type double jump if they also have a set of aerials built exactly around those specific physics and the related tech as well. Considering the specific image I had for the Knight and their high fall speed, I decided that despite any inaccuracies, they just have a regular double jump, although I did put in some decent effort to make sure the animation was pretty accurate to source.
Did you consider giving them an Quibble Charms mechanic at some point?
That's a great question actually, Wizard, because charms were part of my pitch for the Knight almost since conception, but they were scrapped basically at the last chance possible. Explaining them mechanically, they were intentionally rather minor passives you could pick out in the select screen. Less like entire gameplay changes, but more like small flourishes to fit your playstyle. I know it's rude to talk about the dead like this, but I guess it's kind of like how Multiversus had its perk system for every character. In the end, for a lot of mods, I planned something, then reached the end and realized it was actually kind of a superfluous idea. And I do value some solid cohesion and such for mods. With that, I ended up scrapping the charms. I honestly can't even remember well how most of them worked. A lot of them were a lot simpler than the base game somehow. I mean, I do remember Shape of Oon would let you crawl on the ground as a worm for your crouch. That's very important. I bet everyone will be going worm mode all the time. Yeah, worm mode. On that note, actually, I'm reminded that ZP Knight also planned on having charms, and those were scraps too. So I guess at the end of the day, the Knight is just cursed to never have charms in rivals, as much as those would actually be really cool as abyss runes, all things considered.
I was wondering if I'm missing a specific reference to their F-Strong and their dash attack, or if they are original moves you designed, similar to their fair and up tilt.
So, funny story, Dash Attack is an original move that I made from the ground up. Since it was necessary to make a few original moves, I thought it'd be interesting to have one that utilized the Monarch Wings from the double jump offensively, and I think I ended up having a predisposition for moves like that, considering it's quite close to how one of my other mods, Mimikyu's Dash Attack, also operates. Now, on the other hand, the Knight's F-Strong is based on the Great Slash nail technique, taught to you by Nail Master Shio in the game. Although, with a reference like that, the readability issue discussed earlier comes into play. When the knight uses the Great Slash in the source material, it's basically just does a forward slash with a bigger hitbox. With that in mind, I turned to the God Home fight against Paint Master Shio, who with his paintbrush does a clashing swing with the weapon for his version of the Great Slash. So with that way, I could keep the reference but be much better telegraphed for a strong.
Is there any particular insight or detail to the knight's design you would like to highlight?
Oh, great. So just to give some final insight, the Knight might be my mod with the most flourishes that reference the source material, and I'm quite proud of that. Many of the animations were sourced from me going to an empty room in the game and recording myself for the reference. And on top of that, there's goodies like the Easter egg where you can taunt near the bench in the green path stage that came with it, to sit on it. On another note, the Knight was also my foray into what's called character compatibility. The Dreamnail down taunt allows for custom text of the opponent's dream thoughts or inner monologue to pop up. There's a default set of messages that show up, but also as a mod maker you can easily add a custom message. I'm proud it's a relatively simple type of compatibility that any other dev can easily add without a lot of issue. But also, it opens up for characters even outside of Hollow Knight to have their characterization and lore explored. In fact, I even made a video on my own channel where I show off all of the Dreamnail quotes I hardcoded into mod at release. One last insight, if you allow me, Wizard, is that the Knight was explicitly designed to not require a soul meter. As personally, I'm not really a fan of how hard it is to gauge how much soul you currently have in Hollow Knight. Call it a skill issue or something. And thought it was interesting to have a unique spin on how enhanced spells worked, too. With that in mind, I basically tried making sure it was a mod I myself could enjoy. In the end, I do believe there are alternative ways to go about making the meter that could still be a bit more readable for a fighter. So with the release of Silksong, I've honestly been reconsidering what the Knight currently has. And I'm probably amping myself up to make a big update for the Knight. Hornet in Silksong has a lot of moves that the Little Wanderer could pull from, after all, and I myself even have a preferred build I might pull a dash attack or something from. We'll see. Well, that'll be all. Glad I had an opportunity to yap about this character I really like. Thanks for having me, Wizard. See you next time.
Next, a couple of questions made for Ruber Kuber about both his Hornet mod as well as his Mantis Large Stage boss mod. When you were designing Hornet for Workshop, did you base her only on her boss fights, or did you also use trailers and footage from Silksong as reference?
I knew I wanted to include all her moves from her Hollow Knight boss fights, but I wanted to include attacks from Silksong too to supplement. I had the announcement trailer, 2019 demo footage, and the 2022 Xbox trailer to make references from, which I used for attacks like jab, aerials, and forward special. Most of the movement animations referenced off Silksong footage as well. There were some moves that were completely original, however, like back air and down tilt.
Did you reference the previous Knight mod for Workshop when making Hornet?
I originally tried to base the sprite size off ZP's original Knight mod, but since Hornet was much larger than the Knight, she would be much too tall at that scale, so I decided to just shrink her down to a more reasonable size.
Something particular which really caught my attention was her sound design. It's so good. How did you go about making those?
Some moves use the original sound effects from Hollow Knight, both from her boss moves but also the Knight sound effects, like Cyclone Slash sound effects for down strong, Great Slash sound effects for forward strong, and Mothling Cloak for forward special. For her needle attacks, I usually use the default Rival sound effects, but add in a custom layering sound effect on hit to give it a more metallic weapon hit sound. I use this layering sound effect on many of my characters with metallic weapons.
Was there any mechanic, reference, or detail you wanted to add to Hornet, but it simply wasn't achievable?
I originally wanted to include a bind mechanic into her moveset, where you could cancel moves into the bind action, which would have a hitbox or something. However, after making most of the moveset, I felt this mechanic wouldn't be needed. There was already enough in the moveset that synergized well with each other.
Is there any particular insight or detail to Hornet's design you would like to highlight?
Hornet was my first genuine attempt at making a pure rushdown character. While she has a few projectile or stage control elements like her spiked barb and needle throw, they are not really good at zoning and only serve to complement her combo game. I made sure to make many moves interact with each other, such as bouncing off the barb with dash attack, up special, and down air, and multiple moves applying and consuming the silk status effect. I made the entire character and release trailer in under 2 weeks as a personal challenge, made possible in part due to Hornet's simplistic design and the amount of reference material present. Hornet was also my last character I made with Piskel. I have since moved on to using a sprite for pixel art.
You shared an updated Hornet sprite recently as a celebration for the release of Silksong. I know you mentioned wanting to give her a voiced mode now that the game is out, but do you plan on updating her to closely resemble her appearance and moveset from Silksong?
I actually just beat Silksong with 100% completion today, the 13th of August. Took me 60 hours, but the game is such a step up from Hollow Knight. Now that I'm done, I do plan on either updating my Hornet mod in some way, whether it just be updating her sound effects and adding voice lines, or maybe making a Hornet Definitive Edition mod, based more on her Silksong moves, skills, and tools.
The Mantis Lord boss fight stage is extremely impressive. Is there any insight you can give to this development?
Development started on a whim while I was thinking of a different type of boss stage I can make after my Sans boss fight stage. This was around the time I decided to host my first personal direct to show off a couple of new mods, so motivation was steady for the whole development. Also, I just wanted to put Mantis Lord's music in Rivals, so this was the perfect excuse.
Did you consider tackling other Hollow Knight bosses instead or alongside this one? If so, which ones?
I settled on Mantis Lords since it was one of my favorite Hollow Knight bosses, and I felt it could work within the Rivals engine. I didn't really consider making other Hollow Knight bosses, partially because of my direct, and also because I had a decent character backlog in 2022 to 2023. Although if I were to make another Hollow Knight boss, either Hive Knight or Grim come to mind.
Can we see a new boss fight stage from Silksong?
I have a few bosses that when I fought them, I did think this could work in Rivals. I won't spoil anything just yet though.
One detail I really liked is how both Night mods, as well as your Hornet, can now bounce on the bosses, the projectiles, and even the spikes on the side of the stage. Was that too hard to achieve? That consistency with other workshop mods?
The ZP Knight mod and my Hornet mod's pogo attacks were hard-coded to bounce on the spikes and projectile of the boss, since I wanted to keep them accurate to source material. Riga also reached out to me to get their Knight mod compatible with the boss stage too, which was fun to see.
Who's your go-to character for tackling this boss?
I use Clara in a bunch while playtesting this boss, but most of the characters will work just fine, especially if you parry the Mantis attacks.
And finally, a couple of questions from A Talks to Self, who made a bunch of Hollow Knight stages for the Rivals Workshop. How did you go about designing these stages, like in terms of size, layout, etc.?
Whenever I start a new stage, I'll do some research and gather reference screenshots in order to see what I have to work with. From there, I base the layout off the visuals as I start spriting, instead of starting with a set layout. As an example, Green Path uses the arches found throughout the area, which fit as a larger platform hanging over the side of the ground. There's a lot more to exact details of this process, but it depends on the location I'm working with, and a lot of playtesting to see what feels good.
Any particular reason you went with the Forgotten Crossroads and the Green Path areas?
Both Forgotten Crossroads and Green Path are both favorites of mine, and I often base stages off of the music options available, of which both have plenty. I initially chose my favorites musically, and narrowed down from there, as well as looking at what already existed on the workshop. From there, it was a matter of preference, and since I wanted two back-to-back, Crossroads and Green Path felt like the right choice.
The LEGO versions were made prior to the new Green Path stage, which accompanied Raga's Night mod, which is even classified as a remade stage. How would you say you improved the stage between these versions?
Green Path's remake was basically a full overhaul. Outside of the music remaining the same, the only things I kept were the size of the main ground, the left arch platform, and the layered effect on the background. I was originally pretty limited with the LEGO stages due to working with set brick designs, which made smaller details and organic shapes hard to do. Hollow Knight happens to be full of both, so the remake allowed me to get more creative and more accurate with my interpretation.
I noticed that these stages all feature a unique Aether form, which is something that isn't as common in Workshop. How did you go about making these Aether versions? As well as, do you have any other plans for possible Aether gimmicks?
I always try to have something unique to my stage's Aether modes, whether that's a visual change like Green Hill Sunset, a layout change like Obstacle Course, or a gimmick like Final Rush. I went into both Forgotten Crossroads and Green Path with Aether ideas in mind, since it changes to the Infected Crossroads partway through the game. This even gave me a chance to give Aether mode exclusive music. Green Path, however, was the addition of the acid found throughout. Both versions of the stage differ from here though. The LEGO version made the solid ground into a platform, while the remake added another small platform and tweaked the background tint to be greener.
Was there any other mechanic, reference, or detail you wanted to add to the stage, but it simply wasn't achievable?
When Rega and I were planning the bench sitting taunt, he suggested adding the white particles that appear near a bench in Hollow Knight as the player gets close. Between running out of time for the deadline we had set for the stage, and my still limited knowledge of how particles work in GML, this idea was cut. There were a few ideas I wasn't able to do with the original LEGO versions I achieved with Green Path's remake though, namely the dynamic cameos for the Knight and Hornet, and disappear when either appear in the match, and the ambient sound effects that add a bit of life and atmosphere to the stage.
is there any particular insight or detail to the stages you design you would like to highlight?
There's two, actually. The first is adding a semi-transparent layer of color over the background layers. If you increase the opacity of this, as each layer goes further backwards, it will tint the layers towards the horizon. I've used this on all 3 Hollow Knight stages to give the illusion of the background fading into mist, but it's a useful tool to help mimic how faraway objects in real life tend to disappear into the horizon, while also adding some contrast against the ground for visibility. The second, and most important, is the playtester stage as you design it. No matter how pretty your stage is, if it feels bad to play on, it won't be a good stage. I usually playtest from the stage editor using the Save and Playtest feature, which randomly selects a basecast character to play as. This makes it easy to test platform heights and what attacks reach them, whether platforms are easy to move around on, if they're spaced apart properly, or placed too close together, blast zone sizes and whether they fit the layout, etc, etc. This is especially important if you're not using a standard competitive layout, but I recommend it regardless.
So that was it. It's great having that additional insight from the creators themselves, right? And I hope you enjoyed this video as well. I would love to make other similar spotlight videos, giving a basic showcase, a couple of opinions, and closing with a couple of questions from the creators themselves. Please let me know if you'd like to see more, as well as which workshop would you like to see having a similar treatment in the spotlight. Please let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you all next time. See ya!